In the heart of an old city, there rested a sprawling cemetery. The worn and faded headstones within told of pioneers, doctors, and heroes who fought and died in wars long ago. Lives which shaped and were shaped in turn by the community which grew up bustling and noisy around their peaceful sanctuary. Casey walked along the outside of the gated perimeter, gazing off into the cluttered rows of stone. The wooded retreat was filled with tall Douglas firs, bare-trunked ponderosa pines, and at this time of year, golden chestnut trees. October winds swept through them all, creating a cascade of small yellow leaves which twirled softly to the ground.
I'm sorry it took so long.
Casey sighed as she reached the wide entrance gate.
Work wouldn't let me take off early this year.
A bright orange pail, shaped like a jack-o'-lantern, hung loosely in her hand. It was filled to the brim with fun-sized candy bars, spider rings, and gummy eyeballs. Casey's grip tightened as she contemplated the task ahead. The graves in the front of the cemetery were relatively new, and they grew progressively older as you traveled further in. She wouldn't need to go that far, however. Beside the main path, there was a line of carefully placed pine cones, which she followed as she walked. The trail went on for a while. Hundreds of pine cones collected from the trees nearby. Casey couldn't help but laugh as she imagined whoever had spent the time undertaking such an endeavor. The imagining turned to memory as she thought back to the game she would play with her younger sister. Piper loved corralling all the neighborhood kids and getting them to help her build a fort or a bridge across the creek. The trail of pine cones turned abruptly and headed down a row of headstones. Shrugging, Casey decided to follow. The names and dates of a couple dozen souls passed by as she strode along the trail, taking care not to tread over occupied ground. Casey wasn't overly superstitious, but felt it would be disrespectful to do otherwise. More than once, she looked over her shoulder at the sound of leaves shifting behind her. The worst culprits were the large chestnut seed pods which fell with heavy thuds, disturbing the otherwise silent yard. Beneath each autumn-shrouded canopy, the skins of the pods lay scattered about the headstones like fuzzy alien eggshells, their contents scattered on the dirt nearby. Ahead there came into view a half-fallen crypt. Moss grew in thick bunches around the crumbling roof. Its rotted door leaned in the frame. Separated from its hinges, it provided little actual protection from the elements. Casey slowed as she approached it. There was that feeling again, a presence that had followed her all along the pinecone path. The sun was low in the sky, casting a long shadow which stretched outward from the crypt. In the small cracks left by the dismounted door, there was only darkness. Still, she stared long, trying to see inside. Slow as creeping death, 4 fingers reached out from the darkness, curling around the edge of the door. It slammed aside with a bang. Casey fell backward onto the grass, her candy flying from her pumpkin pail. A skeleton lunged from the crypt and stood over her. "Bone gang!" the skeleton shouted as laughter erupted from the crypt. A different young man stepped out of the shadows, holding his phone up to film. The skeleton removed his cheap rubber skull to reveal his distinctly human face. Realizing what was going on, Casey calmly gathered the candy from around her, then brushed herself off and continued to walk. Wait, hey, I'm Snarko. You just got snarked.
I can tell.
Casey didn't stop.
Wait, we need to do a post-prank reaction. Don't you want to be famous? You could be huge, if your reaction is huge.
And how old are you?
I'm 26.
Wow.
Well, hang on. You're the only person to come through here, and I need to post something tonight to keep my numbers up. I'll pay you.
So you spent hours setting up that pinecone trail to lure someone over here. Then you desecrated a crypt, which I'm pretty sure is a crime.
We didn't mess with any pine cones.
A chestnut pod thumped on the ground nearby. Casey stopped and turned to glare at the 2 pranksters. Snarko shrugged, just as a couple more seed pods fell. Then another. The canopy above them shook violently, causing a hail of pods to rain down, pummeling the three. With a shrill scream, the cameraman covered his head. Wild as a storm, every branch thrashed until the last chestnut fell.
What the hell? Jeremy, did you catch that?
They stood among a pile of empty seed pods, their eyes darting about.
Was that the wind?
Jeremy shook his head and grabbed his phone off the ground. The two huddled together watching the footage as Casey gathered her candy again.
Yo, this is crazy. What do you think? We could pivot and go for a paranormal investigation instead.
With a nod from Jeremy, the two ran to catch up to Casey, who had already begun to follow the pine cones again.
I don't want to be in your dumb video,
she said as Snarko reached her side.
Then, why are you following the trail still? Just leave.
Because it reminds me of my sister. The little weirdo used to set up elaborate stuff like this to scare me. She'd disappear when I was babysitting her. And right when I started to panic, she'd pop out of a laundry basket or a cabinet, all giggles. She'd cross her eyes and ask if I was really scared.
Were you?
Startled, maybe. But the thought of losing her is what really frightened me.
Jeremy, you getting this?
Screw you!
Casey walked off faster as Snarko fell behind to consult his cameraman. The trail of pine cones ended with a spiral. Casey looked up to find herself in a clearing surrounded by massive firs and pines. An old part of the cemetery, this section was little more than a cluster of headstones, their names worn away by time. Dense branches all but blocked the setting sun, which fell in orange beams across this quiet place. Beneath the oldest Douglas fir was a small pile of ash and feathers, which Casey approached apprehensively. Drops of dried candle wax circled the offering. When the wind blew, a smell of rosemary and sage rose up from the pile. It was beautiful.
That's it?
Snarko circled the clearing, peeking behind trees.
Hello, ghosts! Prepare to get bone-ganged!
Jeremy spun around, pointing his phone in any direction where a ghost might be. The clearing remained still.
Let's go!
Spotting the shrine, Snarko hurtled over one of the graves to stop beside Casey.
I get it. That's what's keeping them chill.
As the final whispers of sunlight faded into darkness, he kicked the offering, sending ash and feathers floating off into the trees. Casey shoved him away, losing some candy in the process. Having finally gotten the reaction he needed, Snarko grinned. Branches snapped high above. A cacophony of bony rattles shook the entire canopy. Green flames sparked in the darkness. Small fires, like candlewick eyes watching in judgment, flickered and swayed as they descended to the ground. Jeremy turned his phone light on, revealing a half-dozen small creatures fast approaching. Their heads were human skulls in various states of decay, with emerald sparks for eyes. Tangled moss covered their short bodies, woven here and there with knuckle bones and feathers. Each had 4 spindly arms, the color of pale blue veins. Ill content with the light being shined on them, the creatures lunged at Jeremy, pinning him to the ground. Fast as insects, they used their multitude of hands to dig up the very soil beneath him. He screamed, holding his camera aloft and flailing it wildly to record his attackers. Dirt flew upward in a cloud of earthy haze as he sank into an early grave. To the bitter end, he never said a word, just held his phone straight up as his face was covered. Snarko, finding his courage at last, ran to his friend, snatched the phone out of his limp hand and continued straight out of the clearing with pursuers in chase, rattling their mossy cloaks. More flickering eyes sparked up in the starlit woods. Casey attempted to reach for Jeremy's hand but found that it was gone. The ground was smooth, as if nothing had been there. A large rock fell from a nearby tree, barely missing Casey. It slammed heavily onto the ground to mark his place of rest. Having seen enough, she raced away, squinting for the trail of pine cones which had led her here. The cemetery was alive with the sounds of clattering bones and scurrying feet. Casey rushed past headstones and old crypts. The pine cone trail turned in on itself, weaving through looming trees. The creatures had moved it at some point. Perhaps they were just ahead, altering it again and again to lead her further astray. All the while she was pelted with chestnuts from the darkness. Hands gripped Casey's arm tight and pulled her behind a half-fallen crypt. Snarko shushed her, then leaned out to check for monsters. He was wearing his mask again, no doubt in an attempt to blend in with the locals. There was nothing nearby. Looking confident, he stepped out onto the path, then turned to signal Casey that it was safe. Before she could step out, he froze and stared long at the doorway to the crypt. Snarko shook his head in terror, then spun about in an attempt to run. A mass of small, shadowy figures swarmed from the crypt and pulled him screaming back into the darkness. The unhinged door shut fast behind him. Casey bolted from her hiding place and ran back to the main path out of the cemetery. She was cut off by a horde of clattering critters which corralled her back around, leading her deeper in. Struggling and out of breath, she proceeded on pure instinct alone. There was a route she knew well enough to find it on a moonlit night. When she reached her destination, she collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. Her candy pail was nearly empty. Just a couple bars and one spider ring. Still, she placed it gently in front of Piper's headstone.
I made it.
She chuckled.
Well, trick or treat, kid.
4 small hands crept over the granite slab. With some effort, the creature pulled itself up and crouched there, staring at Casey. She sat still, too tired to be afraid. Eagerly, the thing retrieved a pair of slender bones and played a short drum roll on its skull. With 2 free hands, it removed a gummy eyeball from beneath its mossy cloak and plopped the treat gently in the jack-o'-lantern-shaped bucket below. Looking back up to meet its gaze once more, Casey saw her little spark eyes cross.